Pokemon Legends ZA is interesting because I think between the people that hate this game and the people that think it's one of the best in the series, I'm somewhere in the middle. I like Pokemon Legends ZA a fair bit, but it's definitely not one of my favorites in the series. I don't see myself replaying this game too much. I worry that when I end up replaying this game, the shallowness will start to set in because I don't think there's that many different viable sets in Pokemon Legends ZA. I think Pokemon Legends Arceus had a similar issue to where really the only viable set was running mostly just attacking moves. In Pokemon Legends ZA, the main combat revolves around establishing your Pokemon so that it can deal as much damage to the enemy while taking as little damage in the process as you can. And I think the real-time element really makes that gameplay shine more than it would in the main series, which I think does make up for ZA having less viable options, which I'll get into later. In this way, I think it's better for more casual players since the core gameplay is more fun without you having to invest in silly strategies or think about things like setting up and sweeping or using moves or using entry hazards like sticky webs or spikes or even the status conditions. Alongside this, you'll also have to consider how quickly a move will take to cast, because every move has a different casting time, and therefore each move is differently effective in different situations. For example, long-range moves like Ice Beam or Gunk Shot are a lot more useful when you're far away from the opponent, though a lot of these things matter more in the ranked mode because in the single player, the opponent's Pokemon will pretty much always run towards you and you'll very rarely miss your attacks. I think the main two styles this does encourage in the main, trainer battling are close range sets and long range sets. The close range set would be something I use on my Lopunny, so Mug Punch to get in, Headbutt and Ice Punch to do some good damage, and protect myself in case they use, say, a fighting move. Unfortunately, Lopunny doesn't have that many good normal stab moves, so this set is questionable, but I'm sure there's other Pokemon you can use it on, like Pangoro, that have better success with this. Another example of this is my Ampharos set, which has Volt Switch and Thunderbolt. Volt Switch being good when the enemy gets close to you, since Volt Switch and other moves like it, like U-Turn and Flip Turn, if Flip Turn's in the game, teleport the Pokemon to the trainer, and so it gives my Ampharos time to fire off a Thunderbolt while the Pokemon is approaching. It's also good because Thunderbolt tracks the opponent, which is very useful in the ranked mode, but is less useful in the single player, since again, the trainer doesn't do a very good job of avoiding your attacks. Protect also helps stall, so I can get out Volt Switch again to continue the cycle. There are also area effect moves like Earthquake and Discharge, though they kind of just act as close range moves in the single player. Though in the multiplayer they are proper spread moves, since you can actually fight multiple Pokemon at once in the ranked mode. I don't think I used a single AoE move on my Pokemon in the single player, though I did use 11 Pokemon, so maybe there's one of them that I used it on. Each move also tells your Pokemon to go to a certain area. For example, ranged moves tell your Pokemon to go to the side of you. Close range moves tell your Pokemon to go to the opposing Pokemon. You can direct your Pokemon this way, which is quite helpful during the Rogue Mega Evolution battles, which I'll get into later. Granted, you don't have to think too hard about all of this, because pretty much every trainer has the same attack strategy. which is go up to you and click a move. And a lot of the trainers Pokemon have a variety of move types, so you won't really see a trainer with, say, a bunch of physical close range moves. You might see a trainer with a close range move, a far away move, a protecting move. There's not that much synergy. Unfortunately, a lot of the alternate win conditions are pretty unviable in Pokemon Legends ZA. Specifically, stat boosting moves feel a lot worse in ZA than they do in the main series, at least in the single player. I know Calm Mind is good in ranked, but I'll get there when I get there. In this game, stat boosting moves only boost your stat by one stage, or 50%, compared to usually boosting one stat by 2 stages, or 100%. Think Swords Dance or Nasty Plot, or even Charm. I'd say this makes most stat boosting moves pretty useless, though it does make moves that boost multiple stats, like Calm Mind, pretty decent. This also means that you can't really stack debuffs on your opponent, which is a pretty big part of the single player experience in Pokemon, or the main series Pokemon at least. You know, debilitating your opponent and then setting up yourself. That's a really powerful strategy in the main series, especially against like Totem Pokemon and the what are they called in Scarlet and Violet? The big Pokemon, the Titan Pokemon. That's what they're called. They're also useful against the Reverie, but I'll leave it there. The same thing has happened to the non-volatile stats conditions, you know, like Burn and Paralysis. Burn is still pretty okay, since I believe it still halves an opponent's physical attack. Although the issue is that Will-O-Wisp is a pretty abysmal move because it travels really slowly, which you can make it work in the single player, but in multiplayer you'll basically never hit Will-O-Wisp against an opponent, and by the time you do, they'll probably have just used Earthquake on you and taken you out. Thunderwave also has a similar issue, but the difference is that Paralysis isn't even a good status condition in this game. All Paralysis does is slow down your Pokemon's movement speed, which, outside of some very specific things in the multiplayer, is completely useless. Because trainer battles, the Pokemon in trainer battles don't move very much, it makes it pretty useless in the single player as well. The same thing is with Confusion, which just makes the Pokemon move a bit strangely, which is also completely useless. So the difference is you're probably not using Confused right, and Confusion was also really bad in the main series, so Drowsy returns from Pokemon Legends Arceus, but it works in a completely different way. Instead of making you take increased damage from direct attacks, instead it just increases the move cooldown, which, even you have 4 moves, and if you end up using all 4 of those moves, you've probably killed your enemy, or taken out your enemy. So I don't see Drowsy being very useful at all. In case you're wondering, in Legends ZA, Drowsy was basically Paralysis, but instead of halving the speed, it instead increases the damage they take from direct attacks. So Drowsy is another not very good status condition. And going from a very bad status condition to a very, very good one is Freeze. But Freeze kind of has the issue of Hold Sleep. In fact, Freeze is basically just Freeze from the main series, in that it's basically a free KO if you manage to freeze a Pokemon, which can only happen with a percentage chance on certain Ice-type attacks. Then the Pokemon just kind of sits there and doesn't do anything. I believe the Pokemon can eventually thaw out, but it takes so long that you'll probably be KO'd by the time that happens. The main issue of Freeze is not that it's too good, but in that there's pretty much no strategic depth. You use an Ice move, and if you get the Freeze, good job. But if you fail to get the Freeze, then you're still using a really good attacking move, so why is Freeze still in the Pokemon series, I have to ask? Poison is a weird move because on the surface it's not a very good move. By the time... Because stall is barely a thing in Pokemon Legends ZA, I believe stall is borderline unviable as a strategy. Even in the single player. Poison pretty much does nothing. However, there's a cheese strat with poison. I use the strategy on alpha Pokemon a lot. Basically, if you poison a Pokemon, if it's an alpha Pokemon, you can just recall the Pokemon and then just dodge its attack until they die from poison. And in a trainer battle, there's a separate issue. Although you can't recall your Pokemon, the switch timer takes such a long time, which I think regularly it's fine to have a bit of a pause to kind of recoup your thoughts and think of a new strategy. And it also acts as a reward for the aggressor, since the aggressor is able to rethink their strategy as well, and kind of take off a lot of the stress they might have built up. The problem is that the timer takes so long that you can very much just wait for the poison to wait the entire duration so the poison ticks down, or you can use it when an opponent is Mega Evolved to run down their Mega Evolution timer. This is mostly just an issue in the single player because they reduce the time it takes to switch in rank. And because ranked is point-based, you don't want to stall for very long, since other players will be able to get a lot more KOs than you in the time you're out of action. Though even still, I don't really like that poison cheese as an option in these games. I don't think it's that big of a deal in trainer battles. Though there is also the Mega Evolution timer cheese, which is more of a problem. Since I think in trainer battles, or at least from what I experienced in the main series, the main game, you kinda need a Mega of your own to stand up against an opponent's Mega Evolution. And if you don't have a Mega, you kind of just wait for their timer to reduce, because usually they'll one-hit KO you unless you have a resistance. This is made worse because they'll usually Mega Evolve their Pokemon last, so you'll have less options to deal with them because your own Pokemon have probably been KO'd. This is also worsened by the fact that the trainers are usually monotype. So if you're fighting Canary, you'll probably have your ground type KO'd at some point, unless you explicitly save it for the Electros. Oh, you can also do Poison Keys with other damage over time moves like Infestation. Kind of funny that Infestation went from one of the worst moves in the main series to one of the best for, like, Alpha Cheese. It even has a bit of tech in the ranked mode because it makes your opponent able to switch, which can make them a sitting duck. Other fun tech moves include moves that lay a trap on the field, like Fire Spin or Stealth Rock. I'm not sure how good they are because you can avoid them, but the AI doesn't avoid them, so maybe it's good in the single player actually. I did use a Fire Spin Delphox and had some success with it, because DOT is extremely strong in Pokemon Legends ZA. Explosion is also a really funny tech move in the ranked mode, because when you're about to get KO'd, you could just explode on them. Though the person who attacked you last, I think, still gets the point if you explode, so it's more funny than anything. I think there was a time where a lot of Metagross ran Explosion as a fourth move, but I haven't seen that recently. I think I should elaborate a bit more on ZA ranked now. It's a free-for-all match, like the Battle Royale from Pokemon Sun and Moon, where your goal is to KO as many Pokemon as you can. Like the rest of ZA, I think this game mode is very good at expanding on the core strength of the ZA combat system, but the set variety is basically non-existent unless you want to get funky. In the ZA rank, there's pretty much 3 different types of sets, which Moxie Boosted has labelled as the Garchomp, the Gardevoir, and the Clefable. become a Cetaphil Fairy. Don't worry, there's no follow me in this game. In fact, they act a lot of the other moves as well, like, I think Sticky Web is still in the game, as is Electro Web, which act as, sorry, Entry Hazard. They also forgot to mention moves like Mystical Fire, which do damage and reduce stats. I know Icy Wind is borderline useless, but I did find a lot of use in Mystical Fire since it makes your own Pokemon bulkier. They used it on a Clefable set in the rank to make Clefable even bulkier, and also allow Clefable to be able to deal with some of the steel types like Metagross and Excadrill. Anyways, a Garchomp is basically a Sword Dance, I guess, sweeper. You Sword Dance and then you click moves to try and take out as many Pokemon as you can. This is kind of how I use my Pangoro and my Delphox in this team. Pangoro focuses more on coverage moves, while Delphox focuses more on raw damage. And then you have your Gardevoir, which is, funny enough, the set I use in my Clefable, which is basically Calm Mind Sweeper. You click Calm Mind when no one's looking at you, and then you try to deal a lot of damage through special moves. Usually you want to use this on a especially bulky Pokemon like Gardevoir, so you take little damage in the process. At least from special moves. And then finally is the Clefable, which is the set I am not actually running on my Clefable, which is double screens. You set up Light Screen and Reflect, which are, I think, the main two good status moves in Legends ZA. Because they reduce damage a significant amount, like in the main series, and you can pass them to your teammates by switching. So what the Clefable tries to do is set up both screens, and then I believe they want to switch to a Garchomp or a Gardevoir to, you know, sweep while being relatively safe. I've seen a Clefable set with Ampharos, where instead of switching to someone else, they charge and then Thunderbolt, because Thunderbolt is incredibly good alongside Psychic, because it tracks the opponent and always lands on them, even if they're running away. So what the Ampharos does is click both screens, click Charge, and then click Thunderbolt, and more or less just repeat that until everything's dead. It's actually a really good set. Ampharos is a pretty good Pokemon in this game, believe it or not. I actually forgot to mention the Megas. So the Megas in Ranked mostly act as a one-time Protect. Also forgot to mention that Protect is pretty useless in Ranked because most people use the plus moves, and Protect can't fully protect against plus moves. So if a Excadrill uses plus Earthquake on your Delphox, Protect probably won't protect it from that. So Mega Evolution acts as a Protect that does protect against plus moves, but it's only one time. And after you use it, you get a superpowered Mon for basically the rest of your life. And Mega Evolution always uses plus moves, which increase the damage of a move by 30%, which can allow you to get some helpful KOs. Normal Pokemon can use plus moves too at the cost of 1/4, I think, is 1/4 of the Mega Energy. If you need to take out some important Pokemon, like, I usually plus move my moves on my Pangoro because Pangoro usually misses the one-hit KO otherwise on a lot of common Pokemon. That's also why I'm running a Life Orb on it. I think when the meta first started out, a kind of funny thing happened where a lot of the Western players were using 3 Megas, while I believe the Japanese players either use less Megas or no Megas. And I think now we've gotten to a point where generally running 1 or 2 Megas is the best play. I know my team is a 1 Mega team with Mega Delphox and then just 2 regular Pokemon, especially because Mega Clefable isn't very good. Because Clefable already isn't very good at... Clefable already doesn't have the best stats. And giving it a weakness to a very common type in Electric and Ice, that's just not a very good thing to do, even with the power boost. So running regular Clefable is better in this case. I guess on that note, I'm glad that they managed to balance the megas pretty well to where they're useful, but they're not overwhelming. I'd argue that they're more balanced than they are in the main series, honestly. Though a lot of the megas don't have their abilities, so megas that relied a lot on their abilities, like I suppose Mega Kangaskhan would be one, are a lot weaker than megas that don't really have good abilities. In fact, I think one of the issues with Mega Pokemon this game is that most of the good Mega Pokemon are already on good Pokemon, like Mega Garchomp, Mega Tyranitar, I think, and especially Mega Gyarados. Like, all three of those Pokemon are already really good, and the Mega just makes them better because you can, you know, get a one-time Protect and then a Power Boost. Whereas a lot of the weaker Megas are more or less left in the dust. Especially, I think a big example of this is Mega Mawile, because Base Mawile is such a bad Pokemon, and you have to use Base Mawile, or at least have Base Mawile in your team for a while, since you can't Mega immediately. You have to gather Mega Energy. So you more or less have a dead slot on your team until you Mega Evolve your Mawile, and I think at that point you should probably just use a better Pokemon like Mega Gyarados, or especially Mega Gardevoir. Mega Gardevoir was always one of the best Megas, and the fact that everyone got it for free, yeah, you saw a lot of that roaming around in the early days. I will say Mega Mawile does have a good matchup against Xerneas, but yeah, you still have to use the bad Mawile for a bit. I'm surprised I had that much to say about ZA rank. I know it's the mode that I play by far the most nowadays, but still. So the combat is better than Pokemon Legends Arceus, but a fair bit worse than the main series with a lot less step. The catching is significantly worse than Pokemon Legends Arceus. I think the main issue I have is that the wild zones are way too small. Really, the only benefit to having wild zones this small is that you can catch all the species in a wild zone with relative ease. But that also means there really isn't a reason to return to a wild zone once you've played it. Because you're going to be encountering the same Pokemon in the same locations. And there really isn't much variety once you know where all the Pokemon are in the wild zone, because all the Pokemon have fixed spawning locations. So every time you revisit the zone, you'll see, you know what you're getting into. Pokemon Legends Arceus had this same thing, but I think Legends Arceus made it work because of the size of the map. So when I think of Avalug's Legacy in Alabaster Icelands, I know I'm going to find a lot of Bergmite and Avalugg there, but I don't feel like I'm seeing the exact same positions of Pokemon because the areas near Avalug's Legacy are very nondescript. So it's more so like a hub for Avalugg. I know Legends ZA does that, but the areas they're in are just way too small for it to be interesting to me. The catching mechanics itself are also a fair bit weaker. Namely, the aiming is completely gone. Although I do like the real-time element of the catching, since you have to focus on both your player character and your Pokemon, while your Pokemon, the enemy Pokemon, is attacking both you and your Pokemon. It can be a lot to think about, especially when you're fighting an Alpha Pokemon, which often switches between attacking your Pokemon and attacking you personally. Although Alphas also just have way too much HP for my taste. And you can poison cheese them, so I used to say the catching might be worse than Scarlet and Violet, because Scarlet and Violet has randomized Pokemon positioning. So every Pokemon won't be in the same location. And Scarlet and Violet had the mark system. I love the mark system since it's like a mini shiny hunt. Whenever you find a Pokemon with a mark, there's a bit of intrigue wondering what kind of mark the Pokemon has. and it gives the Pokemon a very visible, like, personality, quite literally with the personality marks. And for some reason, the Legends games did away with them, which is very disappointing to me. I think I would have preferred there to be a smaller amount of larger wild zones. So maybe like 5 big wild zones rather than 20 little wild zones. So I think having a smaller amount of very substantial wild zones to explore would be a lot more fun. You can also find Pokemon around the city, which I think is more interesting since the city is very big, even if the spawns are fixed, you won't be able to keep track of every spawn, so it's always a nice surprise seeing like a Dratini on top of a building, or a Slurpuff near some stools, or even a Gumi by the river while it's raining. That one's a really fun Pokemon because it only appears while it's raining, to my knowledge. The final 2 things I want to talk about are the ZA Royale and the Rogue Mega Evolutions. I'll start with the Rogue Megas. They're basically the noble fights from Pokemon Legends Arceus, though I think they might be a bit better than the nobles, solely because you have your Pokemon with you at all times, so you have to balance dodging the Rogue Mega's attacks while also making sure your own Pokemon doesn't take too much damage. So it's kind of a risk of how much do you want your Pokemon to get in and deal a ton of damage, and how much do you want to keep them safe from harm, which I think is a fun dynamic. I think this really came to a head in the Zygarde fight, which, although the Zygarde fight did take way too long, I did like the rhythm of sending out my Lopunny, Mach punching in, ice punching them a few times, and then repooling them when the Zygarde is going to attack. Though it did get very boring after a while. I think one of the issues with the Rogue Megas is that it does kind of feel like you're throwing things at them and hoping it sticks. Because I think the Rogue Megas have a lot less interesting attack patterns than the noble Pokemon. And the fights are also quite easy. I don't think I failed a single Rogue Mega encounter. I didn't even fail the Zygarde encounter, really. So I did have to spam potions because the fight just took so long. It was the same thing with the Ange fight, again with the potion spam and it taking way too long. But I did like that it had a pad you could figure out, like, a boss fight in a video game. I think another annoying thing about the Rogue Megas is that you either need to use plus moves or your own Mega Evolution to damage them. So that does create an interesting thing of like staying near your Pokemon to increase your Mega Energy gain. And oftentimes you use moves for their Mega Energy gain and then you switch to a Mega Evolving Pokemon to spam plus moves to take down the Mega Evolution, and you more or less cycle that a few times, which I think is relatively fun. I think the main thing with the Rogue Megas that got on my nerves was having to do 3 of them in a row after every single rank up, which got extremely tiring after a while, especially when I wanted to just get back to doing either the ZA Royale or the story. It gets kind of draining after a while, you know? Speaking of the ZA Royale, not sure I have that much to comment on it. It's more or less just the trainer battles from the main series, but condensed into a side activity. There's an element of sneaking up on the trainer, where you need to approach the trainer when they have their backs to you, which is relatively fun. It's not a very complex gameplay, but I think as a short burst of arcadey fun it works. And I think when you're at level, the fights themselves are relatively simple. And they're relatively fun too, and fairly challenging, especially when you start to do a lot of them and your Pokemon begin to wear down. since you don't get healed after every fight. You only get healed if you either go to a Pokemon Center to heal, which can waste some of your nighttime and make you have a lower speed, or if you beat a Team Flare Nouveau member, a Pokemon Center lady, or a barista, all three of which will heal up your entire team, which is nice of them. You could also do what I do and switch around multiple Pokemon in your party, because I had a team of 12 when I was playing the game. Because Pokemon games, as of late, have a tendency to hand the player way too much experience. And having lots of Pokemon in your team is a really good way of keeping your levels fairly low so the game doesn't become too easy. In fact, if you're ever playing a Switch Pokemon game, I would recommend doing this to counteract how much experience you get. Being underleveled or at level makes Pokemon games way more fun. I think the minigame, like, with the cards, the minigame, like, thing of trying to complete a certain task is also quite fun, especially since it combines with knowing if your Pokemon can take the beating to dish out a beating of their own, as I mentioned earlier. It combines with that because now you're also considering if you could slot in one of the bonus cards without causing too much issue on your own part. I don't think I have much more to say about the ZA Royale. My mind blanked after I thought of the cards. It's a very simple gameplay loop, but it's a relatively fun one. I think that's the theme of ZA, being very simple, but being, like, very fun at a baseline. I think unlike a lot of, like, Scarlet and Violet, for example, you need to put in quite a bit of work to have fun in Scarlet and Violet, whereas ZA, you can't tweak the game to make it as fun as possible, but the base amount of fun in ZA is higher than Pokemon Scarlet and Violet when you're not putting any effort into, say, managing your levels or making a creative team. That's a good way of summing up my opinion on ZA. And I think it's also a good way to recommend this game, and shows you what I think it succeeds at, and what sort of Pokemon player would enjoy ZA, and what sort of Pokemon player wouldn't enjoy ZA. And I think that's also why I personally wasn't as into ZA, because ZA heavily cuts down on the team building aspect, although the base battles are still fun. And it also kind of butchers the catching aspect in a lot of ways, which is another aspect of Pokemon I really enjoy. So, on the gameplay side of ZA, that's basically everything I have to say, unless my mind suddenly remembers something about the ZA Royale I forgot. But it's not looking likely. The last thing to cover is the roaming gameplay, or the exploration part, which I really don't have much to say on. It's kind of similar to Scarlet and Violet and Legends Arceus in that there isn't much to it, but it's at least fun in a sort of, I guess, mindless way, and what it's worth, I do enjoy roaming places in video games for no real reason. Like, I'm one of the few people that like free roam in Mario Kart World. I do like the kind of puzzly element that the parkour has in this game. Both the roaming the rooftops and the parkour scaffolding sections you can do for colourful screws. You know, a lot of the times when I'm playing a game, I see a TM or a colourful screw on top of a building, and I wonder how I'm supposed to get over there. Could it be a Holovator I haven't activated or seen yet? Could it be finding a specific rooftop that is in the range for a Rotoglide? Also, the exploration does get a way better when you get a Rotoglide, I think, after you unlock Mega Evolution, which is after the first few ranks. I think I'll wrap up with the gameplay structure later, but I'll just talk about, you know, the exploration. You can find some Pokemon on the rooftops, like Dratini and some Larvitar, But for the most part, you'll find the common sites like Pidgey or Fletchling or even Flabébé. It's pretty rare that you'll find something interesting in the rooftops. Of course, it's always fun when you encounter an alpha up there, but that is just random chance, so yeah. Roaming the rooftops also isn't very challenging because there aren't really many tough Pokemon to contend with up there. Again, you're mostly going to be seeing Fletchling and Pidgey, and neither of those are particularly strong Pokemon, are they? In fact, I think there's very few Pokemon that actively attack you in the rooftops. I think it is just the Alphas and Larvitar, and maybe Patrat. I don't remember if Patrat attacks you up there. Or if Patrat is even up there. Patrat seems to be more in the streets. I guess it's a nice thing to do when you're going from place to place. You know, when you explore a new place, you might as well look around a bit to see if you can find all the items or all the TMs or the colourful screws. And the rewards you get are pretty good. TMs are obviously always useful, and there are multiple use in this game. They were single use in Scarlet and Violet, so I guess it's nice to have them being infinite use again. Colourful screws give you upgrades to your Canary plushes, which give you some upgrades like increased money game and increased experience, as if you need more experience. There's some nice game-wide collectibles, and I really like that you don't have to collect all the screws to get the max upgrade, unless you want to go for the, I think, the giant Canary plush, which does require you to get all the screws explicitly. I don't think I've really experienced that much jank with the character movement. It is relatively context-sensitive Pokemon-esque stuff, so don't go expecting like a 3D platformer like Mario 64 or something. This is still very much an RPG. So I'd say the moveset is relatively comparable to something like Xenoblade in that aspect, or something like Kingdom Hearts. Now I really don't have much to say on this gameplay. In fact, I actually forgot to talk about it when I started recording the video yesterday, so I left it to last to, you know, and I still don't have much to say about it. Again, it's not bad, it's just I don't really play Pokemon Legends ZA to roam around the rooftops of Lumia City. It's just kind of a bonus side thing you can do in between the battling. I guess to end off, I'll talk a bit about the structure of Pokemon Legends ZA. In the beginning, you just have to fight your way through the ZA Royale, and then you do a rank up battle, which doesn't take much time at all. It's a pretty fun arcadey style of thing. I believe when you get to about rank B, you fight Vinny, and then you get skipped up to rank F, which I know my first playthrough I was a bit bummed about that because I was fully ready to do all 25 ranks. I'm going to be very upset if there are 26 letters in the alphabet. But seriously, I think this is good for the game because after rank F, the ranks become a lot more substantial. You do 3 Rogue Mega Evolution battles, and then you do some story content, and then you do the ZA Royale and the rank up battle to cap it off. Which means that every single rank is kind of like its own episode. My main critique here is that the 3 Rogue Megas don't advance the plot much at all, and they can get kind of tedious when you do 3 of them in a row. So I do appreciate that the game lets you explore the wild zones and do the ZA Royale before anything else. It's nice that you're not railroaded into doing the Rogue Megas before doing anything else, like you would be in a traditional Pokemon game. I always thought that was the best part about Scarlet and Violet, and that you can really do whatever you want at any time. And I'm glad that ZA carried on that spirit in some small ways. The Rogue Megas, finding the Rogue Megas, are probably where the exploration gameplay is at its strongest. Or at least it's most relevant, since you do have to find the Rogue Megas on top of the rooftop. And that can be a somewhat involved process of doing. So that's neat. The story content can also kind of be whatever it wants. Like in the Corbeau episode, you were just doing chores. In the Canary episode, you were doing a quiz show for Canary. In the Jacinthe episode, you're just doing battle after battle in a tournament. And it's all pretty fun, I'd say. And the charming characters do make it fun, I think. It's just doing the same structure repeatedly, especially with the free rogue megas, can get quite tiring. I don't know, just take breaks between the ranks, I suppose. For some miscellaneous things, I think the Pokedex is of a pretty okay size. It's pretty much the same size as Legends Arceus' Pokedex, which I'd say is a bit bigger than something like Pokemon Platinum. It'll have a good amount of options, although most of the Pokemon species don't really matter, because what really matters for each Pokemon is just the stab combination they have, and their typing, and sometimes the coverage moves. I know Lopunny got like messed up because they had no good stab moves, but usually the Pokemon you find will have some good stab options. With the exception of Vivian, which is a pretty bad Pokemon when support is a lot less valuable. Most of the Pokemon felt pretty samey on my team. Pretty much all of them were dedicated attackers, and none of them really had their own charm, I'd say. Which is something that was also an issue in Pokemon Legends Arceus, in that every Pokemon in that game also feels the same. Though I'd say Arceus has the worst battle system because since it's turn-based, there is kind of just less depth than in the main series. I actually really don't like Pokemon Legends Arceus' battle system for that reason. I guess there's the sewers and like the labs, which are some dungeons. I'm glad they didn't take too long. They felt like a pretty good length for what they were, that there isn't a whole lot of exploration in either of them. Glad I got to see Inkay though. There's the cafes, which offer you a series of battles. They sure are a series of battles in a Pokemon game. Oh, there's the photo mode. I think I'll save like the photo mode and the interacting for the story video because it's more of a flavor feature than a gameplay thing. Though also the camera is basically on par with Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. Although the camera in the cafes can get pretty messed up at times. And it's really hard to get the angle you want in the cafes. Is there anything else I missed? I guess the held items are pretty much the same as they are in the main series. Although I don't think you get very many good ones until you unlock the Racine construction guide that just sells you every held item for an insanely cheap price. Life Orb is like only 5,000 Pokédollars compared to like, I think it's either 50,000 or 100,000 in Scarlet and Violet. And it costs BP, and I think it costs 32 BP in Ultra Sun and Moon. I think that's pretty much everything for the gameplay of Pokemon Legends ZA. I guess let me know if I missed anything in the comments. I suppose that's the end of the video then. I would like to hear some comments in the comment section. This has been Miimii and I'm signing off. Goodbye.